No voice replied, but Will had a feeling of benison. Then it was gone, and the tall glowing form that was and yet was not the old lady moved slowly forward into the darkness toward the doors, and for an instant Will heard again the haunting phrase of music that he could never capture in his memory, and the doors slowly opened. Outside there was a gray light and silence, and the air was cold. Behind him the light of the candle ring was gone, and there was only darkness. It was an uneasy, empty darkness, so that he knew the hall was no longer there. And suddenly he realized that the luminous golden figure before him was fading too, vanishing away, like smoke that grows thinner, thinner, until it cannot be seen at all. For an instant there was a flash of rose-colored brilliance from the huge ring that had been on the old lady's hand, and then that too dimmed, and her bright presence faded into nothing. Will felt a desperate ache of loss, as if his whole world had been swallowed up by the dark, and he cried out. A hand touched his shoulder. Merriman was at his side. They were through the doors. Slowly the great wooden carved portal swung back behind them, long enough for Will to see clearly that they were indeed the same strange gates that had opened for him before, on the white untrodden slope of a Chiltern Hill. Then, at the moment that they closed, the doors too were no longer there. He saw nothing, only the gray light of snow that reflects a gray sky. He was back in the snow-drowned woodland world into which he had walked early that morning. Anxiously he swung round to Merriman. "Where is she? What happened?"
"It was too much for her. The strain was too great, even for her, never before. I have never seen this before."
His voice was thick and bitter. He stared angrily at nothing. "Have they taken her?" Will did not know what words to use for the fear.
"No," Merriman said. The word was so quick with scorn that it might have been a laugh. "The lady is beyond their power, beyond any power. You will not ask a question like that when you have learned a little. She has gone away for a time, that is all. It was the opening of the doors, in the face of all that was willing them shut, through the dark, though the dark could not destroy her. It has drained her, left her like a shell. She must recover herself, away, alone. And that is bad for us, if we should need her, as we shall, as the world always will."
He glanced down at Will without warmth, and suddenly he seemed distant, threatening, like an enemy. He waved one hand impatiently.
"Close your coat, boy, before you freeze!"
Will fumbled with the buttons of his heavy jacket. Merriman, he saw, was wrapped in a long, battered blue cloak, high-collared. "It was my fault, wasn't it?" he said miserably. "If I hadn't run forward when I saw the doors, if I'd kept hold of your hands and not broken the circle."
Merriman said curtly. "Yes." Then he relented a little. "But it was their doing, Will, not yours. They seized you through your impatience and your hope. They love to twist good emotion to accomplish ill."
Will stood hunched with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. Behind his mind a chant went sneering through his head. "You have lost the lady, you have lost the lady." Unhappiness was thick in his throat. He swallowed. He could not speak. A breeze blew through the trees and sprayed snow crystals into his face.
"Will," Merriman said, "I was angry. Forgive me. Whether you had broken the three or not, things would have been the same. The doors are our great gateway into time, and you will know more about the uses of them before long. But this time you could not have opened them, nor I, nor perhaps any of the circle, for the force that was pushing against them was the full midwinter power of the dark, which none but the lady can overcome alone. And even she, only at great cost. Take heart. At the proper time, she will return."
He pulled at the high collar of his cloak, and it became a hood that he drew over his head. With the white hair hidden, he was a dark figure, suddenly tall and inscrutable. "Come," he said, and led Will through the deep snow, among great beeches and oaks, bare of leaves. At length they paused in a clearing.
"Do you know where you are?" Merriman said.
Will stared round at smooth snowbanks, at the rearing trees. course I don't, he said. How could I?
Yet before the winter is 3/4 done, Merriman said, you will be creeping into this dell to look at snowdrops that grow everywhere between the trees, and then, in the spring, you will be back to stare at the daffodils every day for a week, to judge from last year.
Will gaped at him. You mean the manor, he said. The manor grounds. In his own certainty, in his own century, Huntercombe Manor was the great house of the village. The house itself could not be seen from the road, but its grounds lay along the side of Huntercombe Lane, opposite the Stantons' house, and stretched a long way in each direction, edged alternately by tall wrought-iron railings and ancient brick walls. A Miss Graythorne owned it, as her family had for centuries, but Will did not know her well. He seldom saw her or her manor, which he remembered vaguely as a mass of tall brick gables and Tudor chimneys. The flowers that Merriman had spoken of were private landmarks in his year. For as long as he could remember, he had slipped through the manor railings at the end of winter to stand in this one magical clearing and gaze at the gentle winter-banishing snowdrops, and later the golden daffodil glow of spring. He did not know who had planted the flowers. He had never seen anyone visiting them. He was not even sure whether anyone else knew they were there. The image of them glowed now in his mind. But rearing questions very soon chased it out. Merriman, do you mean this clearing is here hundreds of years before I first saw it? And the great hall? Is it a manor before the manor out of centuries ago? And the forest all round us that I came through when I saw the smith and the rider, it stretches everywhere. Does it all belong to... Merriman looked down at him and laughed a gay laugh, suddenly without the heaviness that had been on them both. Let me show you something else, he said, and he drew Will further through the trees, away from the clearing, until there was an end to the sequence of trunks and mounds of snow, and before him Will saw not the morning's narrow track that he had been expecting, winding its way through the endless forest of ancient crowding trees, but the familiar 20th century line of Huntercombe Lane, and beyond it, a little way up the road, a glimpse of his own house. The manor railings were before them, somewhat shortened by the deep snow. Merriman stepped stiff-legged over. Will crept through his usual gap, and they were standing on the snow-banked road. Merriman put back his hood and lifted his white-maned head as if to sniff the air of this newer century. You see, Will, he said, we, of the Circle, are planted only loosely within time. The doors are a way through it, in any direction we may choose, for all things coexist, and the future cannot affect the past, even though the past is a road that leads to the future. But men cannot understand this, nor will you for a while yet. You can travel through the years in other ways, too. One of them was used this morning to bring you back through 5 centuries or so. That is where you were, in the time of the royal forests, that stretched over all the southern part of this land, from Southampton Water up to the valley of the Thames here. He pointed across the road to the flat horizon, and Will remembered how he had seen the Thames twice that morning, once among its familiar fields, once burning instead among the trees. He stared at the intensity of remembering on Merriman's face. 500 years ago, Merriman said, the kings of England chose deliberately to preserve those forests, swallowing up whole villages and hamlets inside them, so that the wild things, the deer and the boars and even the wolves, might breed there for the hunt. But forests are not biddable places, and the kings were, without knowing it, establishing a haven for the powers of the dark, which might otherwise have been driven back to the mountains and the remoteness of the north. So that is where you were until now, Will, in the forest of Anderida, as they used to call it. In the long gone past, you were there in the beginning of the day, walking through the forest in snow, there on the empty hillside of Chilterns. Still there when you would first walk through the doors, that was a symbol, your first walking for your birthday as one of the old ones, and there in the past is where we left the lady. I wish that I knew where and when we shall see her again. But come, she will when she can. He shrugged, as if to shake away the heaviness again. And now you can go home, for you are in your own world. "And you are in it too," said Will. Merriman smiled.
Back again, with mixed feelings.
"Where will you go?"
About and round about. I have a place in this present time, just as you do. Go home now, Will. The next stage of the quest depends on the walker, and he will find you, and when his circle is on your belt beside the first, I shall come.
"But—" Will suddenly wanted to clutch at him, to beg him not to go away. His home no longer seemed quite the unassailable fortress it had always been.
You will be all right, Merriman said gently. Take things as they come. Remember that the power protects you. Do nothing rash to draw trouble toward you, and all will be well. And we shall soon meet, I promise you.
"All right," Will said uncertainly. An odd gust of wind eddied round them in the still morning, and gobbets of snow spattered down from the roadside trees. Merriman drew his cloak around him, its bottom edge swirling a pattern in the snow. He gave Will one sharp look of warning and encouragement mixed, pulled his hood forward over his face, and strode off down the road without a word. He disappeared round the bend beside Rook's Wood on the way to Dawson's farm. Will took a deep breath and ran home. The lane was silent in the deep snow and the grey morning. No birds moved or chirped. Nothing stirred anywhere. The house, too, was utterly quiet. He shed his outdoor clothes, went up the silent stairs. On the landing he stood, looking out at the white roofs and fields. No great forest mantled the earth now. The snow was as deep, but it was smooth over the flat fields of the valley, all the way to the curving Thames. All right," said James sleepily from inside his room. From behind the next door, Robin gave a kind of forlorn growl. "In a minute, coming." Gwen and Margaret came stumbling together out of the bedroom they shared, wearing night-dresses, rubbing their eyes. "There's no need to bellow," Margaret said reproachfully to Will. "Bellow?" He stared at her. "Wake up, everyone," she said in a mock shout. "I mean, it's a holiday, for goodness sake." Will said, "But I—" "Never mind," Gwen said. "You can forgive him for wanting to wake up today. After all, he has a good reason," and she came forward and dropped a quick kiss on the top of his head. "Happy birthday, Will," she said. And that is the end of the chapter.